Welcome to the Extra on KRDO News Radio. Every month, we're lucky we get to chat with Catherine Hammond from Hammond Law Group. Hello, Catherine.
Good morning, Renee.
How was your holiday, your Thanksgiving?
Oh, Thanksgiving was fabulous, and it's just gotten better since then. We added a new granddaughter last week.
I was going to say you have a new Christmas bundle.
Yeah.
Wow,
really
and she's
exciting.
just a week old.
A week old.
And she's doing good.
She's doing fabulous. So she joined her 20-month-old sister. They're staying with me for a few months, so I'm in baby heaven.
Oh, you're like, yay, grandma wins.
Yes.
Right? So when mom says something, you're like, no. No.
I'll get it.
You're like, don't worry. I'll look you up later. Right? Because that's what you're supposed
absolutely,
to do.
yes.
That's fantastic. And we always love talking with you every month because you help get us educated and work on us dealing with the end-of-life decisions, which we all need to deal with because guess what? We're all going to die one day.
I have heard that.
I know, me too. And for those of us that have gone through dealing with end-of-life stuff with people, it's a very important conversation, isn't it?
Right, and there's some really tough decisions that can come up. So
exactly. And one of the biggest things that was just actually talking about dying. I know it may not be easy for some, but
right.
Yeah.
Not the happiest conversation to have this time of year, but I think it's a helpful conversation. And so what I'm hoping we can do today is help prepare your listeners to have conversations while they're around family over the holidays for some of the really important topics that most people haven't thought about.
It's like, you're all together, right? And of course, it may not be a conversation you bring up in the group like, hey, let's talk about this. But,
Right. But it might be. And if you happen to be gathering with your family, being prepared, at least with your immediate family members, being prepared to have conversations about end-of-life care and what makes life meaningful to you and what kinds of things you would want or not want is really one of the greatest gifts that you can give to your family so that they don't have to wonder when a difficult decision comes along, whether they're making the right decision or not.
So looking at some of the statistics, how many people would you think actually really discuss their end-of-life decisions, put it in writing, share it with family members? Do you think a lot of people really do that?
Most people have not. They say that actually there's an organization called the Conversation Project that has done some studies, and their studies said that 82% of Americans say that it's important to put their wishes in writing, but only 23% have actually done that. And then 90% say that talking with their loved ones about dying is important, and only 27% have actually done that.
So there's no conversations happening. Nothing is being put in writing.
Exactly.
So like you said, it's the best gift ever because everything's laid out. Everybody knows what happens when the time comes.
Right.
That is a good gift.
It goes back to, we're all familiar with the Terri Schiavo case, most of us. I don't even remember what year all of that started coming down, but Terri Schiavo, as many people remember, was in a coma and had no medical directives in place, no healthcare agent chosen to make her decisions. Yeah. And so her parents and her husband battled it out in court for many years. I'm sure they spent tons of money on the lawyers just trying to decide whether to end her life, let her go, or whether to keep her on life support. Her parents wanted to keep her on life support. Her husband thought that she wanted to be able to pass on. And so she hung there in the balance, I'm sure paying lots of medical bills as well. And it wasn't until many years later that the courts finally decided that it was okay to let her pass away.
But that was, like you said, that was after how much time and like you said, legal battles.
Agony for the family.
Yeah. And you're very passionate about this conversation, aren't you?
So I am, and that's primarily because this all hit home for me. As many people know, my mom had early onset Alzheimer's. I put her in a nursing home when I was 22. And that was a difficult process. I had to go through the legal system in order to get her into the nursing home and get permission to do everything along the way, sell her house, etc. I knew that I knew that Alzheimer's patients often passed away from pneumonia. I didn't understand exactly how that worked. And so it was all a surprise to me when I got a call from the nursing home 20 years after she had first been placed there, saying that she had a feeding tube. She had been virtually vegetative for probably 12 years.
Wow.
And just laying there. And for a while, she was able to swallow. And then the ability to swallow was decreasing. And eventually it got to where she was just swallowing liquids. And so the nursing home called me one day after she'd been there for 20 years and said, she's choking too much. She's, we're afraid she's going to aspirate, and so we're not willing to feed her anymore. And so you have two options. One is to give her a feeding tube, and the other one is to let her pass away. Which one would you like to do?
A or B. There's your choices. Have a nice day. That's, oh my gosh,
exactly.
Catherine.
So I had two brothers, and I called them both up. Both of them had been not all that involved, but I knew that they loved my mom and that they would want to be part of the decision, even though I was the legal decision maker. And one of them agreed with me that my mom absolutely would not want her life prolonged. The other sibling felt like not giving her a feeding tube would be equivalent to killing her and wanted to go ahead and give her the feeding tube and keep her going. She'd been going for a long time with Alzheimer's.
Like you said, in the vegetative state for 12 years? Oh my gosh.
And so, so it wasn't too long after that conversation that brother called me back and said, no. I really think she would want to pass away. And so we didn't give her the feeding tube. We allowed her to pass away. But what a gift it would have been for all three of us to have had confidence about what made her life meaningful. It could have torn our family apart. There are lots of families who that kind of decision comes up and they never speak to each other again.
Right.
So I really, really love helping encourage families to have these conversations so that you can get the care that you want and not get the care that you don't want and live out whatever your final chapters might
your
look
wishes
like.
are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Live them out in a way that is what you want.
And when we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Catherine about how to start this conversation. Like you said, this might be the perfect time to start this conversation with family members over the holidays and what you need in place to get the conversation started. So we'll have more with Catherine Hammond, Hammond Law Group, next on The Extra on KRDO News Radio. Welcome back to The Extra on KRDO News Radio. Today we are chatting with Catherine Hammond, Hammond Law Group, and she's helping us prepare and get ready this holiday season. It's a good time to maybe talk with family members, your parents, grandparents, whatever, your spouse, about end-of-life decisions. And you and I were having a conversation in the break about speaking with my dad always when, putting a living will in place, he would always be like, 7 days. If something happens to you catastrophic, 7 days in the hospital, generally that's a good, if you're not back in 7 days, that's a good time to let it go. And you said that's what the living will is, 7 days.
Yes.
So that's one of the decisions, I'm sure, in conversations that need to happen between spouses and family members. But how do you get that conversation going?
Well, and there's that conversation about, and the living will only applies if you have a terminal condition and you've been in a coma or otherwise unconscious for at least a week.
Right.
Most of us are going to have decisions that need to be made that have nothing to do with
a
that,
living will,
are not
right.
covered by a living will. There's a beautiful book by a physician named Atul Gawande called Being Mortal. And he talks a lot in there about the balance between quality of life and quantity of life. And we have, for some reason, because medicine can keep us alive, we've decided that living longer is the goal as a society. Every time, no matter what your age or medical condition is, when you go to a doctor or to the hospital, typically what they're trying to do is prolong your life. And there's a book called Knocking at Heaven's Door by a gal named Katie Butler, whose father had a stroke and then ended up getting a pacemaker to keep him alive. Then, as the rest of his health deteriorated, there came a point where they all believed his life was not worth prolonging, but the pacemaker was artificially keeping him technically alive. And they couldn't undo or remove the pacemaker because that would be equivalent to killing him.
Wow.
It gets a little complicated.
Right.
And so Atul has a saying. He says, you live longer when you stop trying to live longer. What if the goal is not just a longer life, but a good quality of life? There are things that are important to people who are old and sick beyond just living as long as possible.
Right.
And when we start becoming comfortable with our mortality, we can start to see death as a sacred part of the life cycle. It's a sacred act, and it's not a failure. And if it's not a failure, we can start to talk about what do we want the final chapters of our life to look like,
Right.
so that our families know for the other decisions that need to be made.
Right.
Pacemaker, no pacemaker, et cetera. There are 8 billion variations on a theme of what decisions could your family have to make. Coming back to our values and what's most important to us is where I recommend that people start
that conversation.
We don't know what decisions your family is going to have to make for you.
And actually asking the person, what do you want end of life to look like, right?
Exactly.
What do you value most?
Right.
But there's also, once you have that conversation and you get an idea of what they want, you do have to proceed, though, with the formalities of getting everything together, don't you?
Absolutely. And they say that 6 or 7 out of 10 Americans have absolutely no written estate planning documents in place.
6 out of 10.
Yes.
Wow.
A lot of folks, all of the clients of Hammond Law Group, have their medical directives in order. So they have their healthcare power of attorney, their living will, and their universal HIPAA release.
And that is everything that everybody should have in place, right?
Exactly. Those are the documents. And they feel great about that. And we feel great about that. However, there are still so many decisions that your family might have to make, like the one I had to make for my mother.
Do we take her off? And they're not going to feed her. Do we take her off life support?
And if you become, let's say that you develop dementia, and there comes a point where you're not able to reliably turn off the stove every time that you cook. Does that mean that we should move you into a
care facility
in order to keep you safe?
Yeah.
What about that whole independence versus safety thing? Would you rather live longer at home and go down in a flame having cooked your favorite meal?
Right, yeah.
Or would you rather live out your days in a nursing home?
Okay, and we're going to have to take a quick news break, Catherine. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about having the conversation, and we're going to again touch on absolutely what the medical stuff, directives people need to have in place, and more. We're talking with Catherine Hammond, Hammond Law Group on the Extra on KRDO News Radio. Welcome back to the Extra on KRDO News Radio. We're chatting with Catherine Hammond, Hammond Law Group, talking about having the conversation with family. And it's like you said, Catherine, this is a great time of year to actually do that. Everybody's together, and if you think about it, it's the ideal gift.
Right.
For your family, for yourself, is having the conversation about your end of life decisions.
There's a whole movement called, they call them death dinners, where you invite your family over specifically to talk about your end of life wishes. So why not make it fun and pour a glass of wine and dig
Right.
into some of that while everybody's in town, maybe over the holidays.
Yeah, which is a really great idea. And before we hop into the goal of having the conversation, and there's lots of goals. There's not just one main goal besides, okay, we need to talk about my end of life choices, but the other goals to shoot for in the conversation. But let's go over really quickly. And I always have you do this when you come, but the medical directives that you should always have in place.
Right.
So what are those medical directives again?
So the healthcare power of attorney names somebody to make your medical decisions if you can't communicate those. The living will says how you feel about artificial life support if you have a terminal condition or are otherwise unconscious for at least 7 days and there's no hope of you recovering. And there are a number of other things that are contained in each of those documents, but those are the big ones. And then the universal HIPAA release that says it's okay for the following
Individuals.
loved ones, exactly,
Yeah.
to find out my basic medical information. For example, if you, let's say, have a heart attack and get taken to the hospital, your family cannot call, your friends cannot call the hospital and say, hey, is Renee there? How's she doing?
Right.
Unless they specifically have legal authorization to do that.
And that's where a lot of folks, even parents, think, okay, well, my grown adult child, I can just walk in and go, we're mom and dad.
Well,
and they're
of course.
But
Yeah,
no.
I gave birth.
Yeah. But the hospital goes, can't
It's
help
not
you.
the way it works,
That's
right?
the way it works
And
anymore.
I have personal experience with that.
Yeah.
So, universal HIPAA release is a very simple document that says the following people always have a right to my medical information.
Perfect. Now, when
So
you're
it's a great starting place.
it is a great starting
Then
place.
we need to talk about all the things that are not covered in those documents.
Absolutely. And that's the goal of the conversation, isn't it?
Yep.
So what are some of the
To
goals?
make your family feel competent and confident in making whatever decisions, from should you have this surgery or not?
Right.
Should you get the pacemaker or not? Should we keep you in your home, or should we move you somewhere where you will be safer, so that they feel confident and competent in making all of those decisions? And for most of us, that comes back to not what will keep us alive, as we were talking about earlier. Most of us don't just want to be alive longer. We want to have a good life as long as we're here.
Right.
And so it's, how do we maximize the quality of life? And for some of us, for me personally, I would rather have a shorter, higher quality life than a longer, lower quality life.
Right.
That's just me.
Right. So those are some, and I think the thing when you're talking about the goals, the conversation, this isn't a one-time conversation, is it?
Right.
It's always evolving.
Absolutely. We discover new nuances, and we might even change our minds
Right.
about things.
Or something might develop.
Right.
But also, if you make sure your power of attorney isn't in place, your medical power of attorney, they should know it ahead of time. If something happens where you're incapacitated, where you cannot make those decisions for yourself, the power of attorney can go, no, she wouldn't want that. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you've had the conversation. And so the question is not whether to fight to stay alive or to give up. It's really, what is it that you're fighting for? What makes life meaningful for you?
Yeah.
What are the reasons that you still want to be alive?
Well, and I think, you can tell me, because you have the conversation all the time with your clients, but isn't it the people surrounding that person that are striving to keep them alive?
Typically, yes.
Where the person would be like, no, let me go.
Absolutely. I just met with a client family recently. It's a widow and her adult daughter and daughter's husband. And as we were sitting at the table, mom had already done her medical directives. And we were going back over the choices that she had made. She did not choose her daughter as her healthcare agent because she's afraid that her daughter will not do what she wants. She feels like she has already lived a good long life. She knows that her daughter wants to keep her alive. And so she's having somebody else be the decision maker so that her life won't be prolonged.
And that's a hard reality, but that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I want to keep you alive, but is that beneficial to that person?
Right.
And that's a scary conversation to have. And I'm sure the daughter's like, what do you mean? You know what I mean? You didn't make me the decision maker.
Exactly. And what do you mean you don't want to stay alive as long as possible?
Yeah. So when you're the person that is getting ready to have the conversation, say you are like, okay, I'm thinking about my end of life. What things should you be thinking about when you're like, okay, I'm going to initiate the conversation. Here's my end of life decisions. What things should you be thinking about when you're working on that?
I think the starting place is the big picture. What makes life worthwhile for you? And so where I encourage people to start is by closing your eyes and picturing you had somebody come to you in a dream last night and they said, you only have 1 year left to live. What are the things that you want to do in your last year of life? And getting really clear about that is a starting place to then dig in a little bit deeper into the things that make life meaningful for you and that would make life worth fighting for. And so you might have things on your list like, for me, travel is still a big one on my list.
Yeah.
Having those experiences is really important. Being with people I love. And for me right now, I have 2 tiny little granddaughters, and I have a 3rd granddaughter, just found out yesterday, who will be arriving in May.
Oh.
I want to spend time with them.
Right.
And so that for me then becomes one of the things that makes life worthwhile for me. So getting clear on the things that we most want to do, first of all, so that we can make sure we're doing them while we're still healthy. But second of all, so that then as we go through the rest of the questions that people should be considering, you can be thinking about, okay, what kinds of situations would my life not be meaningful anymore? And therefore, would I maybe not want to be fighting death?
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Very deep thinking today, but it's a conversation you have to have with yourself and others. And when we come back, what other questions should you be asking yourself and preparing for end of life? Because guess what? It's all coming for all of us.
Right.
Right.
Might as well make friends with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have more with Catherine Hammond from Hammond Law Group next on The Extra on KRDO News Radio. Welcome back to The Extra on KRDO News Radio. We have a few minutes left with Catherine. We got a lot to talk about. We're talking about having the end-of-life choices, decisions, conversation with family. It's a great time to do it. I didn't know you were saying people were having death dinners. Come on over. We're having a death dinner. But hey, pour some good wine and here.
Maybe a glass of whiskey.
Or 5.
Right.
I'm just saying, depending on how you deal with that conversation.
And how your family dynamics work.
Yes, and that's a big part of it. And before we went to break, we were talking about, okay, you're thinking about your life. You're trying to get your final decisions in and decide what you want to do. What are some other questions that people need to ask themselves?
So we talked about what are the things that you want to do if you had 1 year left to live.
Yeah, you're kind of putting it in the 1 year parameter.
Do?
Yeah.
And so as you've sorted through your priorities, for me, it's meaningful quality time and meaningful conversations with the people that I love. So some of the other questions then to start asking yourself and to discuss with your family, what am I willing to sacrifice for the sake of more time? Am I willing to sacrifice my ability to move around in order to have more time where I can have meaningful conversations with my children and my grandchildren, things like that? What am I not willing to sacrifice for the sake of more time? If your thing is reading or football or chocolate ice cream, and
nobody messes with my
anymore,
chocolate ice cream. I'm just saying.
Yeah, when you can't eat chocolate ice cream anymore, you can't taste it anymore, then no need to prolong my life.
Because I can't have my chocolate ice cream anymore. Right, yeah.
What's the minimum quality of life that's acceptable to me? What am I fighting for? What are the reasons why I want to be alive? What are my biggest fears and concerns about end of life? That's a great one to talk about with your family. I'm afraid I'm going to be hooked up and kept technically alive, like Katie Butler's dad, longer than I can have a meaningful life. Or I'm afraid you're going to cut me off
too soon
before I'm done, right?
Right, yeah.
Because I'm afraid you all want my money, or whatever
Right.
somebody might be afraid of. Those are great questions to have with your family, and also for you to hear, even if you're having conversations with your adult children, you need to know how they feel about these things, because it could be you making the decisions for them. What goals are most important to me in planning for my last chapter? And then once you go through all of those values-related questions, let's get practical. Who are the people that you want to have this conversation with?
Right.
Probably if you're married, you probably want to have it with your spouse.
Probably a good idea, yes.
If you have adult children,
probably a good idea, yes.
Talk to them.
Yeah.
If your parents are living, you might want to have the conversation with them, and then make it a two-way conversation where you're also learning about them. There might be other family members and or close friends who would be involved in some of this, with whom you want to have this conversation. And then once you know your values and who you want to have the conversation with, when is it that you want to have this conversation? We did a workshop for our VIP clients last week who are part of our annual maintenance program. And we went through all of this. And when I said, when do you want to have this conversation? Do you want to have it in the next month? Do you want to have it in the next year? When I put that option out there, they panicked at the thought of going a year without having had this conversation with their loved ones.
So they wanted it much sooner rather
Absolutely.
than later. Yeah.
Yes. And pencil it on your calendar, and then figure out what are the steps that you need to take between now and then. Go back and listen to this conversation again. Write down these questions. Start working through them. You don't have to know all the answers, as you said earlier. So important. This is an evolving conversation.
Yeah.
You're never going to know all of the final answers.
But at least have a quasi plan in place.
Yeah, and start the conversation.
Well, and for anybody who has gone through extensive court battles or, anything like that because of a death in the family, I mean, the more you can be prepared and help your family, I agree with you. It's the biggest gift you can give.
Right.
Fully agree. And do you have more workshops coming up?
We do. We have workshops coming up in January. This time of year, people tend to slow down on thinking about planning for disability and death. So Wednesday, January 10th at 2 o'clock and 6:30 p.m. And then Saturday, January 13th at 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll get back at it and help people take care of their New Year's resolution to
Their
finally
estate planning.
get their estate plan done or updated. So,
And we're already looking ahead for our topic next month. And what are we going to talk about next month?
Next month, we are going to talk about the 8 deadly mistakes that people make with their estate plans.
Oh, goody. That's something to look for.
Yeah. Number one would be not having one.
Right? That would be a big mistake.
Right.
Catherine, it's always great talking with you. Happy holidays, by the way. Merry Christmas. Happy
holidays
New
to
Year.
you.
And
Yeah.
we'll see you in the beginning of the new year.
Yeah.
I'm
I
looking
look
forward to it.
Yep.
And congratulations on the new grandbaby and now another one coming.
Thank you
That's
so much.
exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Catherine Hammond, Hammond Law Group. We'll talk to you next month. Coming up tomorrow on The Extra, love talking to Cooks Marketplace. Genius cooks, by the way, and going to help you get ready for the holiday season. Maybe not so much stressful cooking this year. We'll find out. That's tomorrow on The Extra on KRDO News Radio.